It's important to remember that everything we talk about today is general information and not medical advice. You should always talk to your doctor about your own health situation. Today we're going to be exploring stroke using information from stroke.org. That's the website of the American Stroke Association.
Sounds good to me.
So stroke. It's a leading cause of death and disability in the U.S. What makes it so impactful?
It's really the brain's vulnerability. Those brain cells need oxygen and nutrients constantly. And they get that through the blood vessels. A stroke disrupts that. And then the cells don't have what they need and they die.
Wow, so it's like a power outage for the brain.
It is, yeah.
So what causes that? What causes that disruption?
Well, there's two main ways that it can happen: blockages and bursts. And that leads to what we call ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke.
Okay.
So think of it like a highway system. An ischemic stroke, that's like a traffic jam. There's a clot and it's blocking the blood flow. And then that part of the brain doesn't get the oxygen it needs.
That makes sense.
And then a hemorrhagic stroke, that's more dramatic. It's like a burst pipe in that highway system. A blood vessel ruptures and then the blood leaks into the brain.
Wow.
And that disrupts the flow and it damages the surrounding tissue.
So then what's a mini stroke?
Yeah, a mini stroke or a TIA, that's a transient ischemic attack.
Okay.
That's like a brief road closure, so it's a temporary blockage.
Okay.
The symptoms are kind of like a stroke, but they go away pretty quickly, within minutes or hours.
Okay.
There's no lasting damage, but it's a warning sign.
It's like a little blip, like, hey, pay attention.
Yeah, exactly.
So we know that the brain is this really complex organ that controls everything we do. So how does the location of the stroke actually impact? Like, what happens?
So you can kind of think of the brain like a control panel, and different areas control different things. If a stroke happens on the left side of the brain, you might see the effects on the right side of the body.
Interesting.
Yeah. The left side often controls things like language and logic. So you might see weakness or paralysis on the right side of the body, difficulty speaking, maybe trouble with problem solving, and even a more cautious kind of personality.
So it manifests on the opposite side of the body.
Right. And on the other hand, if the stroke happens on the right side of the brain, that usually controls things like spatial awareness and creativity. So you might see problems on the left side of the body. And the effects might be things like weakness on the left side, vision problems, trouble navigating or understanding visual information, and maybe even a more impulsive personality.
Wow, that's so interesting how it's so different depending on which side of the brain is affected.
Yeah.
So what about the brainstem? What happens if the stroke affects that?
The brainstem, that's where things get really serious. That's the connection between the brain and the spinal cord, and it controls all those vital functions like breathing, heart rate, consciousness.
Right.
A stroke there can affect both sides of the body and lead to very serious disabilities.
Wow. So it's really important to be aware of the signs and symptoms of a stroke so you can get help right away.
Absolutely. Recognizing those signs and acting quickly can be life-saving.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Recognizing those signs and acting quickly can be life-saving.
Yeah. But preventing them in the first place is really key too, right?
Yeah.
We often hear about what to do after a stroke, but how do you actually reduce the risk?
Yeah, that's a really important point. Stroke.org recommends kind of a multifaceted approach. You want to really build up a strong foundation for your brain health.
Okay.
Things like managing your blood pressure, controlling cholesterol, keeping that blood sugar in check, staying physically active, eating a healthy diet, and then, of course, quitting smoking.
So lots of different factors. It's not just one thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like tending a garden. You're giving your brain the best environment to thrive.
Makes sense. So high blood pressure, that's often called the silent killer, right? What makes it so dangerous when it comes to stroke?
It's all about the pressure on those blood vessels. If you have high blood pressure, the force of the blood pushing against the artery walls is just constantly elevated.
Okay.
Over time, that can weaken the vessels, make them more prone to blockages, and even rupture.
Right. So it's like a constant strain on the system.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people don't even know they have high blood pressure. It doesn't always have obvious symptoms.
You don't feel it.
Right. That's why it's so important to have regular checkups.
So monitoring blood pressure is important. What about cholesterol? How does that play into it?
Cholesterol, think of that like a sticky substance that builds up inside the arteries and forms what we call plaque.
Okay.
And that plaque narrows the passageway, makes it harder for the blood to flow through. It's like sediment building up in a pipe.
So then if a clot forms in an already narrowed artery, that's when you have problems.
Yeah, that's often how an ischemic stroke happens.
Okay, that makes sense. What about managing blood sugar? I know that's important for people with diabetes, but how does that relate to stroke risk?
Over time, high blood sugar can actually damage those blood vessels. It makes them weaker, more susceptible to clots. It increases the risk of both ischemic and hemorrhagic strokes.
Okay, so for people with diabetes, it's a really important part of managing their health.
Absolutely. It's a cornerstone.
So what about some things that everyone can do no matter their health history? How does physical activity help?
Exercise is like a tune-up for your whole cardiovascular system. It strengthens the heart, it improves blood flow, it helps manage blood pressure, cholesterol levels. All of that contributes to a healthier brain and reduces the risk of stroke.
So even if it's moderate exercise, that can make a difference.
Absolutely. The American Stroke Association recommends at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise a week.
Okay.
Or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. And it's good to do some strength training a couple times a week, too.
Okay. So find something you enjoy and make it a habit. What about diet? What should people focus on when it comes to diet and stroke prevention?
Your diet, you can think of it like fuel for your brain. Stroke.org recommends eating lots of nutrient-rich foods: fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean protein, healthy fats. You want to give your body what it needs to function at its best.
Right, so it's not about restricting. It's about getting the good stuff in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just as important to limit certain things like saturated and trans fats, sodium, and added sugar. All of those can increase those risk factors we were talking about earlier.
Right, it's all about finding that balance.
Exactly. And we can't forget about quitting smoking. That's one of the most important things you can do to reduce your risk of stroke.
Right. I know smoking is bad for you, but why is it so bad for the brain?
Nicotine and those other chemicals in cigarettes, they damage the blood vessels. They raise blood pressure. They make your blood more likely to clot. And all of that together just significantly increases your risk of stroke.
So it's like a triple whammy.
Yeah, you could say that. But the good news is that even if you've been smoking for years, quitting can dramatically reduce your risk.
Oh, that's good to hear. So we talk about prevention a lot, but what about after a stroke? What are some of the challenges for survivors and what kind of resources are available to help them?
Recovery from a stroke is a journey. It can be a long one.
Yeah.
The brain can heal and adapt, but it takes time and effort.
It's resilient.
It is. But survivors face a lot of challenges.
Yeah, like what?
Well, physical limitations are common. Weakness, paralysis, trouble with coordination and balance, sometimes sensory impairments, too.
Right, and I imagine communication can be a big issue for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Aphasia, that's a disorder that affects language and communication, and it's pretty common after stroke. It can make it hard to speak, to understand language, to read, to write.
Wow, so it affects all those different aspects of communication.
Yeah, and there's also the emotional and cognitive impact. It can affect memory, concentration, problem-solving skills, even personality.
So it's really about healing the whole person, not just the physical part.
Yeah, and there are a lot of resources to help survivors and their families. Rehabilitation is really important.
Yeah.
Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy.
Okay.
Those can help people regain skills and learn new ways of doing things.
What about support groups and counseling?
Those are important too. Support groups give people a safe place to share their experiences, connect with others who understand what they're going through.
That's a community.
Yeah, and counseling can provide emotional support, help them cope with the trauma of the stroke, deal with anxiety, depression, grief. All those things can be a part of it.
Right, so it's not just about the physical recovery.
No, it's not. And the financial impact of a stroke can be huge too.
I imagine.
Medical care, rehab, maybe lost income, it all adds up. Some estimates put the lifetime cost of an ischemic stroke at over $140,000.
Wow, that's a lot. So what can people do about that? Are there any resources to help?
There are, yeah. Stroke.org has a whole guide to help people navigate insurance, manage prescription costs, find financial assistance programs. And they also have advice on legal and employment issues.
Right, so they really try to cover all aspects of life after a stroke.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that recovery is different for everyone.
Right.
Some people make a lot of progress, other people face more long-term challenges. The key is having the right resources and support to reach their full potential.
Right, and it's about living your best life, whatever that looks like.
Exactly.
So what about advancements in stroke research and treatment? What are some of the things that are happening now that give us hope for the future?
There's so much going on in stroke research right now. It's really exciting. Scientists and doctors are constantly pushing the boundaries.
That's great.
One really promising area is in new medications. They're developing drugs that can actually protect brain cells from damage during a stroke.
So they're like a shield.
Yeah, they're called neuroprotective agents, and they have the potential to really reduce the long-term effects of stroke.
That's incredible. So instead of just dealing with the aftermath, you can actually prevent some of the damage from happening in the first place.
Exactly. And stem cell therapy is another promising area. Researchers are looking at ways to use stem cells to actually regenerate damaged brain tissue.
Wow. So that could actually restore lost function.
Yeah, that's the hope. And in rehab, there's a lot of innovation, too.
Yeah.
They're using virtual reality, gamification to make therapy more engaging and effective.
So it's like a video game.
Kinda, yeah. And robotic devices can help people regain mobility.
Technology is really changing things.
It is, and there's more and more focus on personalized medicine, tailoring treatments to the individual's specific needs and genetic makeup.
Okay.
So it's not one size fits all.
Right. Everyone's stroke is different.
Right.
So we've covered a lot in this part of our conversation, from prevention to recovery to new research. What do you think is the most important thing for people to take away from all this? What's the so what?
I think the most important thing to remember is that stroke is serious, but it's often preventable, treatable, and survivable.
Okay.
If people understand the risks, if they recognize the warning signs, if they take care of their health, we can really reduce the impact of stroke. Knowledge is power. It can literally save lives.
That's a powerful message. There's a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, definitely. It's really amazing what researchers and doctors are doing, not just with treatments, but also with understanding how the brain works and how it recovers after a stroke.
It is. So I'm wondering, what are some of the biggest myths about stroke? What do people get wrong about it?
Well, one big one is that stroke only affects older people.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Age is a risk factor, that's true, but stroke can happen at any age, even young adults and children.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so it's important for everyone to know the signs, no matter how old you are.
Okay. What else? What other myths are out there?
Another one is that strokes always happen suddenly, like boom, out of nowhere.
Right.
While that's true for a lot of strokes, some of them actually develop gradually.
Really?
Yeah, the symptoms can be subtle at first, and then they get worse over time.
So it's not always dramatic.
Right, and that can make it hard to recognize. People might ignore those early signs.
Right. They might think it's nothing.
Exactly. And then another myth is that if you've had a stroke, there's nothing you can do to prevent another one.
Oh, okay.
But that's not true at all. There are things you can do to lower your risk.
Like what?
All those things we talked about before. Managing blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, making healthy lifestyle choices, and quitting smoking. Those are all really important for stroke survivors.
So you can take control even after a stroke.
Exactly. It's about empowering yourself.
So we've talked about a lot of different aspects of stroke today. But what really stands out to you? What are some of the things that you've seen that have really stuck with you?
You know, it's the stories of resilience that I remember the most. The stroke survivors who have overcome incredible challenges, they really inspire me.
Yeah, they show us what's possible.
They do. I've seen people regain abilities, adapt to new ways of living, and find joy in their lives, even after a stroke. It's amazing.
It's really powerful. It shows the strength of the human spirit.
It does.
So as we wrap up our conversation about stroke, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. The importance of getting help right away if you think someone's having a stroke. Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Stroke is a medical emergency. Time is brain. You have to act fast.
Right. Every minute counts.
If you see any of those FAST warning signs, face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, it's time to call 911.
Don't wait.
Don't wait. Call 911 right away.
Okay, we'll remember that. So we've learned a lot about stroke today. The different types, the effects, how to prevent it, and the amazing things that stroke survivors can accomplish.
We have. It's a complex topic, but there's so much information out there.
Right. Stroke.org is a great resource.
It is. And of course, your doctor is always the best person to talk to about your own health.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really informative conversation.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. We hope you learned something new about stroke today.